Whenever you see the Star Wolf series talked about, which admittedly isn't very often, but still, when you do, there's one thing that seemingly everyone agrees on. Skip the second game. But I wanted to see it for myself, and having finished both the main story paths, I can now confidently say that everyone was right. It is a worse version of the first game in basically every way. The parts that do work are the things that haven't changed much from the first game, like the combat, visuals, and leveling, but almost everything that was changed for the worse. Chief among them is the move to a sort of open world. The first game was built around self-contained missions where you'd enter a system to start a mission and leave after finishing it. Interstellar travel took place off-screen, and going off the rails to explore the galaxy wasn't possible. The sequel is more open, consisting of similar local maps to the first game, but with portals that actually lead to other systems in a big network. This might sound nice, but it really isn't. That's because there really isn't a lot to do out in the open world. There aren't any optional side quests other than these procedurally generated jobs. They are extremely simple and extremely boring, with travel taking up most, if not all the time to complete the job. They remind me a little bit of the crappy Radiant quests from Starfield. Did Todd Howard play this obscure, universally disliked game when coming up with Starfield's mission design? The rewards are also really inconsistent. Take this delivery job. Its reward is about $17,000 dues. This other, near-identical delivery job though, over $500,000. Doing these delivery jobs also shows us the other big issue with the open world. Travel isn't off-screen anymore. There is no fast travel, and mission objectives are often in a land far, far away. And there is nothing interesting happening while traveling, other than maybe running into the occasional pirate patrol. Most of the time you just enter a system, find which portal takes you closer to your destination, tell the mothership to go there, put the game on 4x speed, and then spend the next half a minute watching paint dry, until you enter the next system and get to do it all over again. And if you thought you could sidestep this issue by simply not doing the delivery jobs, you can't. The main quest also has a lot of the same uneventful, dull travel. And speaking of the main quest, it's nothing to write home about. In fact, it's kinda terrible. Mechanically, almost every quest is exactly the same. You enter a system, after some dull travel of course, go to the objective and have exactly one fight, with the occasional mission spicing things up by having 2 or 3 fights. You hardly ever get to make any choices on how to complete your objectives, though there are a few choices that can affect how the story goes. And that, unfortunately, brings us to the story. Since this is the second entry in the series, I'll do a quick rundown of the first game's story. You're a space trucker that changed careers to the mercenary business after a run-in with pirates. You work your way up the ladder, taking mercenary jobs fighting pirates, the rogue AI berserks, and an alien invasion. The main conflict though is between the Emperor and 3 powerful corporations. You have to pick sides when the corporations discover the Emperor started the war with the aliens to consolidate his power. In one ending, you side with the corporations to bring them a star-exploding superweapon called the Starhammer, built by a mysterious Precursor race, but instead use it to form your own breakaway state after they betray you. If you side with the Empire, you bring them the Starhammer, and they use it to bring the corporations in line and keep the war with the aliens going indefinitely. It's a classic RPG tale of a ragtag group of nobodies coming together and becoming powerful enough to decide the fate of empires. In the second game, the Empire ending seems to be canon, with the corporations weakened and the war with the aliens having entered a quiet phase. Except there's no mention of the Starhammer, which is a bit strange. You'd think the star-detonating superweapon would come up at some point, but alright. Now credit where credit's due, the intro cutscene does an okay job at establishing why your progression is reset from the first game. There's been an extended period of peace, and peace is bad for the mercenary business. We're broke, even after selling all our ships just to pay the bills. Luckily, returning character Ace is here to give us some good news? Saying the war with the aliens is heating back up, meaning our skills are soon to be in high demand once again. Also, the English voice acting is terrible.
I'm broke. I even have to sell the mothership.
Really? Well, unfortunately, we can only dream of peace and calm. Let me show you what is happening on the borders of space.
It's not just this cutscene either. If anything, the rest of the game is even worse.
Here you are. Give it up, you dogs, or you'll regret being born. Where's Astra, you filthy kidnappers?
I suggest that you get the hell out of here while you still can. Let's show these arrogant bastards. Surround them.
You miserable losers. You've bitten off more than you can chew, and now you're going to choke on it.
After the cutscene and character creation, which is identical to the first game, we meet up with Ace and get our new mothership. It even comes with a pair of pilots who bring their own skill trees to the table, which I thought could help alleviate how fragile the mothership was late in the first game, but this wasn't the case. The mothership still feels like it's made of wet napkins for most of the game, which is made worse by it being faster than regular fighters. So, if you tell all your guys to go to an objective, the mothership will get there way before the fighters and get absolutely eviscerated by itself. The story can roughly be split into 3 parts. In the first part, you fight off a renewed alien invasion. In the second, you reassemble the team from the first game while trying to decode some data captured from the aliens. And in the final third, you fight an invasion from another, unrelated race of aliens called the Angorians. What this brief summary doesn't get across is just how meandering and incoherent the story is at every step of the way. The fight against the aliens is pretty alright, but only lasts for a few missions until you help the Navy capture an alien mothership. After which, the whole alien war plot line is forgotten in favor of a renewed conflict between the Empire and the corporations. A conflict that starts in a very contrived and odd way. After the capture of the mothership, the Empire got help from the corporations to analyze it. But when the naval force guarding the mothership successfully defeats a force of pirates trying to steal it, the corporations call off the whole thing and even attack the Navy because the Navy risked damaging the mothership by fighting near it. Well, what did you want them to do? Let the pirates steal it? And they opened fire right then and there. So much for not fighting near the mothership. Maybe this is meant to convey that the corporations were planning on betraying the Empire all along, and just used the first excuse they got, no matter how flimsy it was. But neither the writing or the voice acting do a good job of conveying that, so was that the intent? We may never know. This is also when we have to pick sides, siding either with the corporations or the Navy. The first game had a decision like that too, except there it was right at the end, so we were actually pretty familiar with both sides at that point and able to make an informed decision. Here, the decision comes right at the start, at our very first encounter with the corporations. And this early divergence doesn't really increase replay value a lot since the very formulaic go to place and have single battle mission design makes both paths feel pretty much the same anyway. After picking sides, the second act has you gathering the old team and deciphering some data obtained from the alien mothership. This is when the meandering I talked about before starts. You get sidetracked with random crap constantly. And the entire process of decoding the alien data happens off screen. You recruit Phantom, the absent-minded scientist crew member from the first game, and after doing a few filler missions, including one where you pretty effortlessly defeat the rogue AI antagonist of the first game, L, who in this game is called Al, Phantom lets you know that the decoding is finished, and that the data is a set of coordinates that you decide to check out. It's here that the third act begins. At the coordinates, we run into a new hostile alien race called the Angorians. And while there's nothing really wrong with introducing a new alien race into the setting, the execution here is very boring. You don't get to learn anything about the Angorians, nothing about who they are, what they're like, or why they're so aggressive. There's even a potential story hook with the data leading to them coming from the aliens. Are they allies? Maybe the war is going badly for the aliens, so they called in backup. Who knows? We certainly don't, since the aliens are never seen again after the first act. This act has 2 main plot points. One being a device Phantom invents to predict where the Angorians will strike next. The best part is, if you side with the Empire, when he finishes the device, it just flat out doesn't work. You go to the system it predicted the Angorians would attack, and some Navy guys just fly up to tell you they attacked a different system, meaning all the effort put into the device was completely wasted.
I am nearly 100% sure that my calculations of the time and location of the next Angorian invasion are correct. It will happen in the Crayon sector.
Attention, Angorians have been detected in the L'Oreal sector. The place is teeming with them. All patrols located in Crayon head for L'Oreal immediately. Initial reports of an invasion in Crayon have turned out to be incorrect.
The second plot point is an artifact that you take from a disabled Angorian ship. In the corporate ending, you learn it's both an endless source of energy and a powerful weapon, so they use it to destroy the fleets of both the Empire and the Angorians, making themselves the undisputed rulers of all humanity. 3 cheers for oligarchy. Hooray, hooray, hooray. In the Imperial ending, you learn that the artifact is a bomb powerful enough to blow up the whole galaxy, and then find a portal to the Angorians' home galaxy. I'm sure you can see where this is going. In the mother of all disproportionate responses, we send the bomb through and blow up their whole goddamn galaxy. Hope no one else was living there. But the third ending I got was definitely the funniest. After learning what the artifact is, Corsair, the expired on the crew, thinks we should just sell it to pirates, since they know how much these things cost. After getting sidetracked for a while, we get an offer from someone willing to buy the artifact for a hefty sum. Okay, it's not actually that much, but whatever, we still agree to meet her. But when we get to the meeting, it turns out it was a trick, and it was actually Al who wanted to buy it. She literally says she's gonna use it to destroy the human race. But I guess we really wanted that back, because in the following cutscene, she just has it, and does use it to wipe out humanity. Fucking oops. I don't know if there are any more endings, and I didn't really care to find out. Between the nonsense writing, terrible voice acting, boring travel, and dull missions, I was well and truly done with the game at this point. And that's not even getting into all the bugs, like the constant crashing, the occasional return of the stationary bullets glitch from the first game, or my pilots sometimes feeling the irresistible urge to repeatedly 9/11 themselves into a space station until they explode. The reviews are right. Don't play this game. Let's instead move on to the third game, Star Wars 3 Civil War. But before we dive into that, we need to go back a bit. There's a briefing you can read early in the third game that describes the state of the universe, and there are some oddities in there. First of all, it makes no mention of anything that happened in the second game, so that's been retconned. Probably for the best. But it also mentions how Astra, one of your crew members from the first game, was declared the legal empress and started a civil war over rule of the Empire. That didn't happen in any of the first game's story paths, so is there something I'm missing? It turns out there is. This game's only kind of a sequel to the first game. It's actually the sequel to a Russian language only mod for the first game called Legacy of the Empire, which adds a bunch of stuff to the game, including a new ending where it's revealed Astra is the last living descendant of the old emperor who was ousted in a corporate-sponsored coup. In that ending, you gather loyalists to the old regime and proclaim Astra Empress of the new empire, starting a civil war for the rulership of humanity. Also, L/Al is defeated by sealing her in the Precursor Shadow Realm with the Star Hammer, so the Star-Destroying superweapon is also conveniently written out of the story. Now, having your sequel continue the story of a fan-made mod sounds a bit unusual, until you realize that the team that developed the mod, the Elite Games team, also developed the third game. Since my very half-assed research didn't yield any answers, I can only guess as to how that happened. But this seems like a rare example of a fan community being given creative control over a sequel. Let's see how it turned out. The first notable change is that we're no longer playing as the founder of the Star Wars Mercenary Company. Instead, we're a small-time trader who was living the good life until we lost it all when our convoy was ambushed and destroyed by unknown assailants. Triada, the corporation we were moving cargo for, has been either unable or unwilling to give us any answers about the attack, but demanded we compensate them for the lost goods, leaving us destitute. Humanity is still engulfed in a civil war between Astra's new empire and the old regime. The chaos has led to an explosion of piracy, and the corporations are still up to their old tricks, jockeying for influence and power at any cost. And that's how the story starts. We're an entirely new character with no connection to the Star Wolves or the events of the previous game, starting from rock bottom trying to reach an old friend and colleague, Alex, for some help getting back on our feet, and discovering the truth about the attack that ruined our life. And that's reflected in the ship we're flying. We have no fighters and no heavily armed mothership. Instead, we're flying an unarmed tugboat getting bullied by everyone since we are utterly powerless. This is classic RPG design. In a genre where a sense of progression and increased power are essential, a great way of giving the player plenty of room to grow is by starting them out as low as possible. But even with no combat, the early missions are good. The security forces of the Triada Corporation press gang us into retrieving some documents they lost, but are ambushed by the Navy of the Old Empire, the MSF, who rather than rescue us, also threaten us into doing their bidding, luring some Triada pilots into an ambush. And while we can't fight to tip the scales, we can and will have to pick a side before we can leave, either helping the MSF capture the Triada pilots, or helping Triada get the better of the MSF. This isn't them just trying to make a good first impression either. Almost every mission is like this, with multiple choices to be made, both regarding how to accomplish short-term objectives in the mission and deciding how the overall story goes. And many decisions will carry over after the current mission is complete. One good example of that is a few missions from now, where we're hired to deliver some equipment to a station when we're intercepted on the way by a returning character from the first game, Heretic. He says the stuff we're carrying is weapons parts, going to local pirates that'll use it to harass traders like us. We can hand it over to him, or complete the delivery. This has some short-term effects on the mission, but also, if we complete the delivery to the station, we can ask them what the cargo was. They say they don't know, just that the recipient is some funny old professor that turns out to be Phantom from the first game. Not only is this a clever bit of writing, using a returning character spinning a tale of us being used to do the bidding of pirates to con us into handing over our cargo to him, but also has an effect on the story later on, with a pretty significant mission, either having Phantom or Heretic accompany us depending on who we gave the equipment to, on top of having 2 entirely different missions following this one depending on our choice. This also brings me to the next point, the writing. It's actually good. I'll get more into the specifics later, but generally, when compared to the first game, where I only found the writing to be serviceable, with some gems sprinkled here and there, though with some pretty good world building, and the second game, where the writing was downright awful, this game actually tells a pretty compelling story with characters that go beyond the pure archetypes they were in the first game. And if you're not audio only, you've probably noticed another big change when it comes to the characters. In the first game, portraits were 3D models, and only your crew members actually had portraits. Whereas this game instead went with the classic RPG edited photo look for the portraits. It's up to personal preference which you prefer, and my opinion is definitely colored by the fact that I overall really like this game, but I think it fits right in with the rest of the aesthetic. And I'm also guessing this switch is what allowed them to give more characters portraits than both the other games combined, which definitely adds some character to the characters, though the writing does a good job of that as well. For example, if we go back to that first mission, there's a scene where some Triada-affiliated pirates hold us at gunpoint, but if we sided with Triada, we can alert them to an MSF ambush, after which they'll escort us to a nearby station and tell us how they became pirates after deserting from the MSF because of their harsh discipline and disregard for their soldiers' lives. It's great world building, does a wonderful job painting a picture of what this world and these factions are like, and there are little moments like it all over the game. Once we're able to leave the system, we head to meet our old friend Alex, who's part of the same organization we are, the Free Traders Union, or FTU, a group dedicated to protecting the rights of traders, which are more under threat now than ever with the Civil War on and the rampant piracy that has arisen in the chaos. Remember these guys, they'll be important later. His first jobs are to upgrade from our flying coffin to something more useful. The first upgrade we get by permanently loading a transport from a guy that gets killed by the MSF as an accused spy before we can return it. We're only able to get away when a force from the NESF shows up to fight them. They're the Navy of the New Empire, the rebel state we formed at the end of Legacy of the Empire. Our guy sums it up pretty well in his journal. Killing the suspected spy by destroying an entire trade station was definitely excessive, but the speed of the NESF arrival implies there might have been something to the accusation. The writing of the Civil War does things like this a lot. The MSF are clearly meant to be the bad guy faction, using ruthless tactics and harsh discipline, but there are also moments here and there that humanize them. There are some good actors in their ranks, but their high command and most of their foot soldiers are just corrupt assholes. And there isn't a lot of moral ambiguity for their opposites in the NESF, they really are just uncomplicated good guys. But this characterization makes sense for both factions. The new empire was founded on idealistic grounds with good people in charge who care enough to enforce their standards on their troops. Meanwhile, the old empire traces its roots back to a coup by the greedy and the corrupt that only care about the conduct of their troops if it costs them support for the war effort. Most of the good people in the MSF have deserted to join the other side, so other than a few exceptions, only thugs running protection rackets and a few fanatic loyalists remain. You get a journal entry like this after every mission, where our guy gives his thoughts on the events of the day and reflects on the choices made. It gives a nice look into the mind of the player character, but it's also completely optional if you don't like reading. Though if you're not into reading, this game might not be for you. I haven't mentioned the voice acting yet for a simple reason. There isn't any. Other than the cutscenes at the very beginning and end, there isn't a word spoken by a voice actor in the entire English localization. Except this one pilot who still has his Russian voice lines.
Какой-то он хлипкий оказался.
I'm guessing that's a mistake. Normally I'm in favor of more voice dialogue in RPGs, but given the series' track record with voice acting, foregoing it entirely was maybe for the best. The localization itself is fine. There are a few odd idioms and expressions here and there, but nothing that really detracts from the experience in any meaningful way. I don't know, maybe this is just what people in the future talk like. Now that we have a real transport, Alex gives us a real mission to haul some equipment to a nearby station. And while I thought the first 2 missions were an improvement over the previous games, this is the one that truly won me over. Shortly after entering the system, a group of pirates shows up to kill us. We're only saved when they're betrayed by one of their own, a woman going by Attorney, who says her pirate clan has been hired to take us out, and that only by wiping them out and taking their mothership for ourselves can we hope to survive. All she asks in return for her help is that we take her with us. She was forced into joining the pirate crew at gunpoint, with them only keeping her alive for the contacts from her smuggling side hustle. But she's constantly worried they'll kill her one of these days, so she wants out. This mission is full of meaningful choices with both short-term effects on how the mission itself is completed and choices that have long-term impacts after the mission is over. For example, we get that scene I talked about a bit earlier, where we can hand over our goods to Heretic or finish the delivery. Turney's plan was to finish the delivery and hire some friendly neighborhood mercenaries to fight her crew, but we can't really do that if we gave away our cargo, forcing us to enlist a rival pirate crew to help instead. The mercenaries will not only wipe out the pirate fighters, but also the crew on the mothership, while the pirates betray us as soon as the fighters are dealt with. They themselves are dealt with by Turney using some mines, but since the mothership's crew is still alive in that scenario, we're forced to negotiate with them. In exchange for letting them leave on the old transport, they give us the location of their leader's secret treasure trove. This completely changes the mission following this, from another cargo hauling job for Alex to going looking for the pirate treasure. This mission, along with others later in the game, also manages to do something the second game never could: actually make use of the open world for missions. While the pirate mothership is a nice upgrade from the transport, with several turrets and a hangar finally allowing us to use fighters, it's still a known pirate ship, wanted in every jurisdiction and covered in a distinct pirate paint job. We have to traverse several systems, avoid stations, and dodge patrols to reach one of Turney's contacts to get its record cleaned up and the paint changed. For what is a pretty short journey, the game does an excellent job making it feel like the whole universe is against us. We have to steer clear of regular routes and have to take cover in a debris field when the NASF almost catches up to us. But it's all worth it in the end when we reach our destination and clear the ship's record, meaning we now have a reasonably well-armed ship, few fighters, and 2 pilots since Turney agrees to stay with us. This is a great mission, with lots of player choice, most of which carries over and affects later missions. It spans several systems, actually making good use of the open world aspects carried over from the second game in a way that game never did. The writing and gameplay also both work towards really making you feel like you're on the run and giving you the feeling of overcoming that adversity. And you might think this is when the game opens up, since it did implement the open world aspects of the second game, and it kind of does. You can go wherever you want at this point. The security guards in some systems won't like you being there, but you could still go if you really wanted to. The thing is, there really isn't any reason to. There aren't any side quests, even the shitty Radiant quests have been removed. The only thing to really do out in the open world is finding loot caches. You'll occasionally run into a trader who will tell you of a system that contains a cache for 5,000 space bucks. But you don't really need to pay him. The caches are in set spots, so you can just look up a list online with every cache location and grab them all for a pretty serious power boost, since they can contain high-end weapons, systems, and even fighters. I wouldn't recommend it though. They're spread out in all corners of the map. Getting them all takes a lot of flying around, which is still just as dull as in the second game, though it goes by a lot faster thanks to the 8x speed option. There are a few of them in systems you'll be going to anyway, so if you want that power boost, you can grab those without having to go too far out of the way. One of them is actually right in the debris field we just went through. 2 of the wrecks in there drop some real high-end loot when destroyed. In one playthrough, I left with 2 Wyvern Mark IIs, 5th generation fighters, the most powerful in the game. You might think this makes the early game too easy, and while other drops from the cache list can do that, mainly weapons, the fighters don't. This game implemented a new skill in the progression tree that determines which level of fighter the pilot is qualified to fly, and if they're not certified, they can't fly it. Unlocking those skills costs a lot of skill points, so no demolishing the early game that easily. Other than that, the leveling hasn't changed much from the first game. While the next few quests maintain the same level of quality, with a lot of player choice and fun combat encounters, I'll move past them for the sake of brevity since they don't really advance the plot. But this is where we get our first taste of the new skyboxes, since one of the missions takes place in this massive asteroid field. Since this game takes place entirely in space, skyboxes usually take up most of the screen. In the first game they didn't leave much of an impression on me. Most were just regular space with maybe a color tint or a distant planet to spice things up. But here you have places like these, or this other map just above a planetary ring system, among other really cool ones I'll get to later. They're a bit low res, but still massively improve the look of the game. Since we now have a mothership capable of carrying fighters, and have done some combat missions, we can talk a bit about the combat. The game runs on the same engine as the first game, so combat is very similar. You can group your fighters into fighter wings for mutual support and ease of control, and the game plays a lot like an RTS, with right clicks giving both attack and movement commands. One issue is that right-clicking enemy fighters can be a bit finicky, since they're pretty small and move around a lot. So if you're wondering why I'm constantly pausing in combat, that's why. Other than that, your pilots can unlock active abilities that give you some more control over how the battle plays out. Aside from them, combat is pretty luck-based. After you give an attack order, your fighters will decide on their own how to approach the target, if they should do an attack run, or if they want to do evasive maneuvers to avoid incoming fire. And you have basically no control over any of that. This does encourage a lot of quick saving, since some otherwise trivial encounters will have some pushover pirates suddenly turn into John Matrix and blast apart one of your top-of-the-line, fully kitted fighters in seconds. When it comes to strategy, I found my winning strategy from the first game worked just as well here. It can be summed up in one word: lasers. Let me explain. There are two categories of weapon, light and heavy, but light weapons suck, so you never want to use them. Among heavy weapons, there are machine guns, plasma guns, cannons, and lasers. They each have their pros and cons. Machine guns are inaccurate, but fire fast enough that they do reliable damage anyway. Plasma guns fire slow-moving, inaccurate projectiles that deal massive damage if they hit. Cannons try to strike a balance between the two, but end up with every downside and none of the positives. Their fire rate is low, they're inaccurate, their damage is low, and their projectiles move too slowly to reliably hit anything that moves, which everything you're shooting at does. Lasers, on the other hand, are the opposite of that. They're all pros and no cons. They're highly accurate and hit instantly, which means unlike every other weapon, they can actually reliably do damage. And the damage is also some of the best in the game. Theoretically, their weakness is a special laser shield a lot of enemies in the late game use to mitigate much of their damage. But even after enemies started using those, I still found lasers to be the best weapon. They're just that good. Eventually, I just started equipping every fighter with lasers, regardless of what the pilot's skills were. A laser expert? Yeah, of course they're getting lasers. A machine gunner? Not anymore. They get lasers. A missile expert? Yeah, you better believe they'll be using lasers. But speaking of missiles, let's have a look at them. They're high damage and homing, so you'd think they'd be great when the biggest issue with other weapons is an inability to hit moving targets. But they're not. Unlike other weapons, missiles are consumed when fired, and they don't exactly grow on trees, so whenever you fire a missile, you're also firing money at the enemy. But even if you can afford to sustain a barrage of missiles, you need to dock your fighter back to the mothership whenever it's blown its load to fill it back up, which takes absolute ages if you're doing it multiple times a mission. And a lot of enemy fighters have missile countermeasures installed that completely neutralize all but the most powerful missiles, so they're also not very reliable. This also goes for enemy missiles. Have one of your fighters with an active missile defense system assigned to missile defense, and you never have to worry about missiles again. That being said, there are some special missiles that can be useful at times, like this one with an extremely high damage AoE explosion that can take out many fighters in a single hit. Though I didn't use it much for fear of friendly fire. Didn't stop my allies from using it though. The only fighters I didn't give lasers were the support ships. One of the pilot's specializations is systems that can help the whole fighter wing. I would have one or two of these with 3 of the ranged healing systems that can repair nearby allies mid-fight. A high-level systems expert with 3 of those can single-handedly out-heal the damage output of entire enemy fighter squadrons, which can go a long way towards mitigating some of the frustration from the randomness of the combat. One thing that's different about the weapons from the first game is the sounds they make. Well, I don't know if they actually changed any of the sound effects, but it's different because now you can actually hear them over the music. I particularly like the sound the particle accelerator, a type of laser, makes when it hits something. It's like a piece of bacon on a frying pan. Delicious. Other than not drowning out all the sounds of combat, the battle music is a lot more to my liking than the rock from the first game. Though I do miss some of the first game's guitar riffing ambient tracks that gave it a nice working class western sort of vibe. That isn't to say the ambient tracks in this game are bad. I particularly like the main theme that plays throughout the game. The investigation continues when we check out the site of the ambush, where we're led to the wreckage of our convoy by a survivor from the destroyed Triada station that was its destination. We confirm that there were no survivors, but also find a new lead. The wreckage of an unpainted grey fighter bearing no faction markings, but fully kitted out in advanced military technology. While we found no answers, we now have some leads to investigate, and the survivor we rescued, an ex-mercenary called Greyhair, joins the crew in our search for answers. At this point, we get a few choices on how to proceed. First, we get an optional mission to steal a battleship from a group of mercenaries to replace the pirate mothership. The mission is a relentless onslaught of pretty elite mercenaries, but it's all worth it in the end. The battleship, the Astarte, is a major upgrade in terms of shields and armor, which reminds me of another thing. They managed to make the mothership not suck in this game. Yeah, the papier-mâché hollow eggshell we were flying around in the other games has been replaced by kind of a beast. It doesn't have a dedicated pilot, but you can upgrade its firmware to basically work like leveling. It also has some really good systems that seriously improve its defenses, like anti-missile systems, laser defenses, and shockingly good self-repairing. And it's not overpowered in the early game, thanks to it being replaced a few times throughout the story. Don't you love it when a developer accurately identifies a problem and actually fixes it in a pretty cool way for the sequel? The mothership also has a new weapon slot, a main armament that's fixed to the ship and can only fire forwards. It's not very good at hitting fighters, but a pair of good ones can rip capital ships apart in seconds. With the new ship, we can follow up on one of our leads, either checking at the mercenary exchange to see if any merc outfits use fighters like the one we found at the ambush site, check with Triada to see if they had any more information they didn't share before, or ask the MSF since they took over the system shortly after the ambush. Hearing this, you might think the story diverges wildly after this into 3 entirely different storylines, but that isn't really the case. It actually diverges into 5 separate paths. And while in the second game the choices didn't matter much because the 2 factions didn't have much personality and every mission felt the same, here the factions have wildly different vibes and the missions are very different from each other. Going to the mercenary exchange will lead to you working for the NESF, the good guy faction in the Civil War, who has you doing smuggling work for their special forces in exchange for information on the attack, and their paths mid-game culminates with a large battle defending an NESF system from a horde of pirates. For contrast, we can use the Triada path as an example, since they're one of the setting's 3 megacorporations notorious for their criminal tendencies in cooperation with pirates. Their path will have you working with pirates to assassinate their corporate rivals and take part in other power plays both in Triada and the second megacorp called USS, which is more of a normal kind of corporation, more likely to perform wage theft than good old regular theft. The point is, all the paths are very distinct from each other, and that includes the crew you end up with. If we keep using the NESF and Triada as examples, the NESF has to recruit a Latino freedom fighter called Jay. You might think that this name's a bit on the nose for a Latino freedom fighter, but it's actually just a nickname. His real name's Fidel. Triada, on the other hand, has to recruit a former USS operative called Alice, who joins the crew to look for leads on her missing daughter. All paths have you end up with very different crews, one especially so, but we'll get to that one later. I haven't even mentioned the 2 hidden paths yet. In the first, you work with a third megacorp, Inoko, specializing in high-tech research to the point where much of their story is about the conflict between their old human CEO and his AI replacement, which will go on to become very important for the main story. The final path is a sort of fail-safe option you get if you start working for one of the other groups and either mess up or refuse to continue working with them. This results in going back to good old Alex, who actually turns out to be one of the main players in the overall plot, though I found his questline to be the worst of them all, focusing largely on getting help from the hacker Cleric, whose obnoxious antics would come dangerously close to self-insert territory, except everyone he meets hates him. Every path leads to our faction of choice providing us with the information we wanted, but not all intel was created equal. The NESF provides a full briefing on the faction behind the attack, which they call the Grace, a secretive group independent from both the empires and the corporations. They operate a high-tech combat fleet specializing in stealth and black ops, and operates a massive spy network with infiltrators in every major faction. Quite the adversary. Most of the other factions provide a lot less information though. All MSF and Triada can do is confirm our pilots are dead, which we already knew. It makes sense that every faction is operating with incomplete information, but as it is, the NESF is kind of the only one that gives you any idea at all of what you're up against. After receiving the intel, all the paths converge with a mission from either Phantom or Heretic, depending on who got the equipment way back in the beginning, to go on a mission with them through a Precursor portal. If you're unfamiliar with the first game and you feel like you need a refresher on what the Precursors are, you really don't. If you've seen any sci-fi setting with an advanced precursor race that isn't around anymore, that's what the precursors are. The portal is in the border sector, past the frontier of human habitation, where we encounter the antagonist faction from the first game, the rogue AI Berserks, who were supposed to be extinct after L/Al was sent to the Shadow Realm at the end of Legacy of the Empire. Their return is presented as a genuine existential threat to humanity, but since we're not here to fight an unending horde of artificial lifeforms on our own, yet, we just do the job we came to do and head through the Precursor portal. And remember when I talked about how good the skyboxes are? Yeah, this is great. It really portrays the massive scale of the Precursor ship. Our mothership's like a speck of dust compared to it. This whole mission's just dripping with atmosphere, and does an amazing job making you feel like an unwelcome visitor looting an ancient mass grave. Especially when the aliens show up to attack us. They haven't appeared in this game until now. They were also recharacterized a bit in Legacy of the Empire from the vanilla first game. In the base game, they only had one conversation where they gave off the vibes of a sort of childlike, innocent hive mind, whereas in the mod they seem a bit more normal, and seemingly only concerned with keeping humans out of the Precursor system. It seems that motivation is stuck, because here, they attack without warning. Most of their weapons are kinda pathetic, since their main armaments are the light slot alien gun, which, like every other light slot weapon, kinda sucks, and the alien missiles, which, like every other missile, is easily countered by a single fighter with countermeasures. Though they do have a trump card, the very sensual-looking nano-torpedo. Unlike what its appearance might suggest, it's not very pleasurable to be hit by. It releases a cloud of nanites that infect your fighters, dealing massive damage over an extended period of time, and it's more or less impossible to avoid. Things take a turn when the portal we arrived through has shut down, and we're forced to escape through an alien portal with an unknown destination. What, Dyson Sphere? Oh. Well, this changes things. Up to now, the aliens have seemed like a slightly more advanced peer to humanity, but it turns out we're like ants trying to fight the US Marine Corps. Except, well, we are able to fight them. Sure, in the story, the war with the aliens that took place in the first game ended in a defeat for humanity, but it wasn't as one-sided as this place would suggest it would be. And that's actually addressed by the characters. After hearing the aliens call the Precursors their ancestors, Phantom theorizes some calamity befell the Precursors to regress them to the aliens we interact with in the game, sort of like the Bronze Age collapse did in our history. These new developments of the aliens do an amazing job taking them from being just a generic enemy type, right down to them just being called the aliens, to an actually really interesting faction. Also, once again, the skyboxes are just, chef's kiss. Only by the mercy of the aliens are we allowed to leave, on the condition that we leave the Precursor artifacts we've looted behind, since the aliens consider them their long-lost ancestors and us simple grave robbers. Overall, a really good atmospheric mission that adds a lot of mystery and wonder to the setting, with probably the best visuals in the whole series. After the adventure in the Precursor system, the main plot returns with a vengeance when we're ambushed by a large force of Greys and Turney is kidnapped in a scripted scene, changing our motivation from a search for answers to a more urgent and personal rescue mission of our kidnapped comrade. The search for the Greys has the paths diverge again when we return to our benefactor from the earlier investigation for help locating the Greys' home base. The paths once again differ wildly, from helping the NESF evacuate refugees from a system under siege by the MSF, to helping the MSF intercept the refugees if we side with them. Or something completely different, like helping a reform faction within Triada assassinate leading figures in the company's pro-crime faction. Ultimately, all the paths lead to us finding out the location of the Grey Space and taking the fight to them in a pretty challenging battle if you're not properly prepared for it. They live up to their fearsome reputation, fielding large numbers of advanced ships, even disabling the Astarte early on in the assault, forcing us to leave it behind. Their ships are some of the first in the game to make good use of heavy lasers, which are just as strong in their hands as they are in ours. If you're prepared with laser shields on your fighters, it's not too bad. If you're not, fighting your way to Turney can get a little spicy. One nice addition is a mercenary squad you can hire to help in the battle. The same mercenaries you had the option of hiring way back in the mission to acquire the first transport. Now hardened fighters, flying hardened fighters, they'll come along for free if you hired them back in the beginning, out of gratitude for your earlier patronage. This game has an interesting, very positive view of mercenaries, even more so than the earlier games where you played as a group of mercenaries. In those games, your character was ultimately motivated primarily by the paycheck, willing to kill on behalf of both the Imperial Secret Police and the corporations. Meanwhile, in this game, every mercenary you run into is this honorable, honest, hard worker, willing to fight for the little guy in exchange for fair prices. The only time you have to fight them is the mission to acquire the Astardi, where we were the bad guys, coming to their system to rob them. It says something about the world the story takes place in when the most moral faction of the bunch are the guns for hire. Eventually, we do make our way to Turney, charging in and rescuing her along with another prisoner, a technical expert called Caleb, who joins the crew alongside her. We're then rescued from the indignity of leaving without a mothership by the representative of our chosen faction, who comes in to join the crew, bringing with them a badass new mothership, the model of which depends on which faction supplies it. And once again, I think the NESF path wins out over the others because they bring us the Star Wolf itself, the classic mothership from the first game, now upgraded not to suck anymore. The difference between the motherships is mostly cosmetic. Their stats and turret placements are a bit different, but I didn't even really notice the difference, other than the vibes. The mission ends in a confrontation with the Grace leader, a man named Kair, when he ambushes us as we leave. With the high-end mothership and a full team, we can put up a good fight until we're assisted by another force of Grace who suddenly appear to fight Kair's faction and leaves without a word after he's dead. And so, we enter the endgame with more questions than ever, but it's finally time for some answers. The paths once again diverge, but eventually every path will have us meet good old Alex, who's finally ready to unveil the long-awaited truth. He reveals the Greys are the secret combat fleet of the FTU. Remember them? The Free Traders Union? The organization we're part of? I found this reveal to be pretty clever. The organization is introduced right at the start, and present as a minor detail throughout the game. There is also some hints of the reveal, such as the special FTU store you can unlock in the skill tree being filled to bursting with the best military hardware money can buy, on sale exclusively to their own members. Their turn to villainy is also well explained. The rise in piracy as a result of the Civil War risked causing the collapse of interstellar trade, and with no faction willing and able to spare forces to patrol the trade lanes, the FTU took matters into their own hands, building their combat fleet with resources embezzled by infiltrators in the other factions' administrations. However, Kair, one of the FTU's own, realized he could use the spy network and fleet to make a bid for power, so he aligned with like-minded people in the corporations and Old Empire to take power for themselves. That second force of Grace that came to our aid in the fight against Kair, that was the rest of the FTU finally taking care of the traitor in their ranks. Up to this point, I found the answer to the mystery really compelling, but it kinda lost me when Alex explained that the Grace attacked our convoy because it was carrying a shipment of new implants that connects brains to machines to use them for mind control reasons. That on its own is kind of a curveball, but worse than that is the pivot to an entirely new villain, Sam, the AI CEO of Inoko, who Alex says is going to use the implants to turn all of humanity into a collective consciousness of cyborgs. Kinda like the synthesis ending in Mass Effect 3, except here it's rightfully portrayed as something we want to avoid. If this seems really sudden and like it comes out of nowhere, that's because it is. In many of the paths, we've never even met Sam, and barely even heard about him before this point. But now he just takes over as the antagonist, only for the final mission. Even in the Inoko path, where we do interact with Sam a lot, this isn't foreshadowed at all. In that path, we meet up with him to plan an attack on the Grace, and he just springs his plan for world domination on us without warning. It's actually possible to agree and decide with him, leading to a final mission where you have to fight every other faction, with a crew of Sam copies since most of the crew abandons you and joins the other side if you side with him, forcing you to kill them. There's actually a nice piece of character motivation to explain why our guy would agree to Sam's plan, because the rescue mission actually ends in failure in the Inoko path. Instead of a heroic rescue, it turns to tragedy when the Grace kill Turney before we can save her. Having our guy's first comrade in his new life after the ambush die in front of him might be enough to make him believe in Sam's vision to end all war. Though it only results in more tragedy when the plan ultimately doesn't work. The epilogue shows a bleak future for humanity. Sam promised that only volunteers would receive the implant, and he held to that. At first. The issue was there simply weren't enough volunteers to sustain their interstellar civilization, so implantation was made compulsory. But even then, they weren't able to unite all of humanity under their wing, with most of the new empire remaining defiant. Wars and raiding between the two are now commonplace. This is what your crew died for. Things are grim. The end. This ending reminds me a bit of the XKCD comic, where someone is outraged by there being 14 competing standards or something. So they set out to develop a universal standard for everyone to use, with the end result being that there are now 15 competing standards. This is the societal equivalent of that. You're outraged by a galaxy full of warring factions, set out to unify them, and succeed only in adding one more warring faction to the mix. In the other endings, you either fight Sam or deal with the leftover conspirators from Kayer's conspiracy. But ignoring Sam will lead to a bad ending where he triumphs and implements his plan, so we won't go too deep into those. For the good endings, there are 3 different final missions, where the factions unite to end Sam's plans of galactic domination by fighting him and his army of berserks. This even includes ending the Civil War after the Emperor abandons his empire to join Kayer's conspiracy, and the NESF signs a peace treaty with the most reasonable, level-headed man in the MSF, Admiral Trump. This game was made in 2010, it's not a reference to him. Probably. You might think being joined by this many reinforcements would make these missions pretty one-sided. And it does. We don't stand a goddamn chance. In the shared NASF and MSF ending, Sam calls in an absolutely enormous force of berserks, far larger than anything we've faced so far, and makes a beeline for the FTU station holding the implants. Not only is there an overwhelming number of berserk ships attacking the gathered allies, but if you pursue Sam, there are more berserk ships and fighters constantly piling in to get between us and him. This is by far and away the most difficult mission in the game so far. Trying to fight the berserks is hopeless. Even the combined strength of all the allies will be overrun by this avalanche of steel. Not to mention that you don't have time to stay and fight. If Sam destroys the FTU station, he gets what he wants, and all you get is a bad ending. The only way I was able to beat this mission was to equip my mothership with every speed boosting and defensive module it could hold, along with a pair of powerful main guns. The speed boost let me keep up with Sam, the defensive modules kept the mothership alive, and the big guns took the artificial bastard out while the fighters did what little they could to keep the heat off the mothership. Since the berserks operate on chess rules of engagement, taking Sam out deactivates all the berserks in the system, and we get a well-earned happy ending where the Civil War ends, Kayer's conspiracy is defeated, and the FTU returns to peacefully trading. The other endings are just as difficult, though the Triada ending where we, without any backup, fight Sam as he tries to access the Precursor portal was made a lot easier when the Berserk's AI crapped out and seemingly forgot they were supposed to fight, making it a really easy fight against a very lonely Sam. On the other hand, the fight at the end of the Alex path and the Inoka path where you fight against Sam is just as hard as the one in the first ending. We're supposed to enter Sam's home system alone and clear the way for reinforcements to enter. From the moment we enter the system, we come under heavy attack from a deluge of endlessly respawning berserk forces, and rushing a portal to bring in backup will only lead to them being overrun too. The only way to beat the mission is to destroy enough berserk capital ships to track them back to their repair yard and eliminated. But breaking contact with the endless tide of berserks is easier said than done. In the end, I had to keep all the fighters in the hangar, rush past the berserk fleet to the repair yard, relying on the mothership's powerful defenses to tank their hits, then deploying the fighters once I reached the yard, and using them to take the heat off the mothership while it destroyed the repair yard with its big guns. This meant we were left just fighting an overwhelming force of berserks rather than an endlessly respawning overwhelming force of berserks. But since the repair yard is close to one of the portals, we could send the mothership to take out the defenses there, allowing Triada to enter the system and even the odds. Once that battle is over, the rest of the mission is a cakewalk, since most of the berserks have been destroyed and the stragglers can easily be cleaned up after the cavalry arrives. And the epilogue is the same happy ending as in the NESF one. I gotta say, that was pretty good, and the happy ending felt so well earned after triumphing against the seemingly insurmountable odds in the final missions. I think a lot of the talk about lowering the difficulty of games so people can experience the story forgets that the difficulty can be part of the story. We're often told, show don't tell, as a storytelling mantra to live by, yet are expected to accept being told the antagonist is an overwhelming force that the plucky heroes triumph against despite impossible odds, when the actual experience of playing the game and defeating the bad guy is trivially easy. Not so in this game. The final levels here did an excellent job portraying Sam and the Berserks as the existential threat to humanity we're told they're supposed to be. And the flip side is also true if you side with Sam. The ease with which you and his Berserk fleet are able to sweep aside every other faction at the same time does a better job of showing their overwhelming strength than any dialogue ever could. The story did feel a little rushed towards the end, with the big info dump explaining the conspiracy we spent the whole game investigating, coming after the Greys have already been wiped out, their leader killed, and their schemes stopped. Not to mention replacing the villain with an entirely new character we were just introduced to in the final mission, on top of changing the entire main conflict from unraveling the Greys' conspiracy to stopping the AI uprising. The story paths also vary a lot in quality, with the NESF path coming out way ahead of the others. It sidetracks you the least from your actual goal of investigating the Greys and discovering the truth of what happened to your convoy. And while the tasks they have you doing don't really relate to the investigation, your motivation is more explicitly a quid pro quo trade for that information, and it gives by far the most useful information on the Greys. The weapon balance could also do with a bit more time in the oven. The supremacy of lasers over all other weapons means there really is only one good build for every combat-focused pilot, regardless of what their actual specialization is. Despite all these issues, the story is strong enough to maintain interest for the entire playthrough. I was constantly left wanting more, and it even left some good potential hooks for future stories with the new mysteries added to the aliens and precursors. And while the moment-to-moment gameplay certainly wasn't the star of the show, the sense of progression, so essential to good RPG design, was present in spades, with the player starting out as a helpless, disgraced traitor and ending up as either the savior of humanity or the herald of its doom. In conclusion, there is such a wide gulf in quality between the second and third games that, despite their many shared elements, them being part of the same franchise feels kinda surreal. It's telling that in its native Russia, the third game is called Star Wars 2: Civil War, and the second one is left by the wayside. It's good enough that, as far as I'm concerned, it transcends its Slavjank roots to become just a genuinely good game by any standard. Sadly, it would also be the last entry in the series. There was a sequel in the works called Ashes of Victory, but a lack of funding from the publisher caused the project to be permanently put on ice in 2012, where it has remained ever since. I wouldn't recommend the second game to anyone, but would absolutely recommend Civil War if you're big into sci-fi and don't mind a lot of reading. This has been Rom. If you liked the video, you can hit the like button, and if you'd like to see more in the future, you can subscribe to the channel. See ya.